Tonight what we are in is Exodus chapter 33 and chapter 34. And tonight we're going to be looking at God's presence. And, you know, as I was looking over this, I kind of felt like this was maybe is an overlooked story that's in the Bible. I think that, as far as like hearing different Bible story lessons, you hear about like, the golden calf and stories like that, right? But this lesson that we're going to look at tonight, this story that we're going to look at tonight, I do remember hearing about it in Sunday school, but I don't know that I really have quite understood all the fullness of what was going on until I was really looking at it, a little bit last week and yesterday. And as I was looking at it, it's like, this really is I think kind of a significant story of what's going to be going on. And the reason for it is that what we see is that, Exodus chapter 33 obviously follows chapter 32, but I mean, it follows it right after time. It's just like, the day that the golden calf happened, and then there's the next day, and then chapter 33 follows right into that. And so we have to look at the story that we're looking at tonight with this idea of what had just happened. And what had just happened was that here you had the golden calf, the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, and what that was breaking that covenant that God had established with them some 40 days prior to that. And so with that breaking of the covenant, then all of a sudden it's kind of like, okay, well, where are they going to go forward from here, right? I mean, God was going to forgive them in terms of not wiping them out as a nation. But at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, how are they going to process the events? What is God going to do about the events? I mean, he did judge the people that were involved and responsible with it. But at the same time, it's kind of like, where are they going to go in this relationship forward? Because there is that relationship there of he's going to be their God. They're going to be his people if they do what he wants. And they didn't do what he wanted. And so it's like, okay, what transpires from this point forward? Because God does have a plan and a purpose for them, which is to eventually get them to Canaan, okay? And so that's what we're going to be kind of looking at tonight. How many of you ever heard about Moses seeing God in the cleft of the rock? Okay, yeah. How much have you really understood about that story as far as the bigger picture? Because that's what we're looking at tonight, okay? Okay, so starting out in chapter 33, in verses 1 through 6, we see that it says, in verse number 1, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses," now keep in mind this is right after that next day where the plague took place, and here he is talking to Moses, and he says, "Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go into the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants." Now, he's not saying do it right then, okay? This is going to take place later. As a matter of fact, what we're going to look at next week is that there's going to be a long period of time that the Israelites are at Sinai. But he is going back to talking again about this plan that he's got for the Israelites. And this is not just simply something that God has just kind of haphazardly decided, right? Because when you look there, he says that he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying that he's going to give the land of Canaan to the descendants. And so, this is something that God, in his foreknowledge and everything that's been going on, I mean, this is 100 years process, 400 years process in the making, and so he's still saying, you're going to get there. Now, it's not going to be for a while, but you're going to continue to go and do this. But I want you to notice this last part, he says. In verse number 2, he says, "I will send an angel before you to drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up into the land flowing with milk and honey, But look at that last little bit there. But I will not go up with you. Now, does that kind of strike you as a little bit surprising? Okay. Here's God, and God's going to be the Israelites' God. They're going to be his people. But since that breaking of the covenant, now all of a sudden there's some separation that has taken place for that. Now, he still is going to allow them to go and do the things that he wants them to do, still fulfill all those promises. But, he's not going to go up with them because, as he explains here, I will not go up with you because you are a stiff-necked people and I might destroy you on the way. Now, we read that and we think, boy, that sounds pretty harsh. But can you see a little bit of grace involved here? God is purposely not going with them because if he goes with them, he knows what they're going to be doing. And so by keeping away from them a little bit, then therefore he doesn't bring on them the judgment that is going to be due them. Does that make sense? And so you can look at that and you can say, well, it does sound like a harsh statement, but you can also look at it and say, well, wait, God is starting to give a little bit of grace and mercy to them because even though they broke that covenant, they have repented of it. And so from that, then, it's kind of like, okay, God is relenting of it. Now, continuing on down in verse 9, does anybody have any questions on that, by the way? No? Okay. So continuing on down to verse 4, it says, when the people heard this distressing words, they began to mourn and to put on and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what is going to happen to you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. And so in other words, before this, everybody was in a kind of a party mode. Everybody was dressed in festive things. And after this, it's kind of like, no, wait a minute. You have rebelled against God. You need to have a reflection of this. And so you can see that, how are they going to go forward from this? What is going to be the attitude of the people going forward? Because if they don't have any kind of change in heart, then they're going to be apt to repeat the same problem again. And repeating the same problem again, isn't going to work because that was a pretty serious thing before. And so at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, well, the Lord is kind of removing a little bit too. Okay? See, you see the kind of situation that he's in, that they're in? Okay. So what we see is that continuing into verse number 7 is that Moses is going to have some concerns about things, look into verse number 7, we see that it says, now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside of the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance to his tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. And so here is one thing that's going to be happening as they go forward is that before you've got Moses and you've got Moses communicating with God, and God is in this pillar of fire, pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. That pillar is going to continue to lead them through the wilderness all the way into Canaan land. But right now at Sinai, what we see is that Moses has this tent outside of camp, not inside of camp, outside of camp. And Moses would go to the tent and that pillar would come and be at the entrance of it. Now, what do you suppose that kind of meant for the people? If you were the people and you were to see that, what would be some things that would go through your mind?
God was following Moses.
Okay.
Since the tent, Moses went into the tent and the cloud followed him.
Okay. So it would be that there is a special relationship between God and Moses? And there was a special relationship because in the tent, Moses and God would speak just like you and I would speak. That's really something, right? Especially when 40 days prior to this, you've got God on the mountain and he is speaking in such a ferocious voice that the people are saying, have God speak to you, not us, because it's so ferocious, we're going to die. So awesome, we're going to die. And so for Moses to have this kind of connection with God, that really is saying something, isn't it?
How far out are we from Golden Calf?
Okay, we are, so Golden Calf, chapter 32, next day, and then into chapter 33. So all of this, as far as what the Lord said and the Israelites stripping off the ornaments, that happened the day after the Golden Calf, okay? And so if the Golden Calf happened on day 40, that would be day 41. Now, Moses going and setting up this tent, I think is a little bit of, kind of going off into the future there. What we're going to see is that Moses goes up the mountain, then he comes back down. And so it could be that, this is even after that. But I think that this is there to kind of show this relationship between Moses and God that's there. And also it's going to show the relationship between God and the Israelites too. Because that tent isn't in the camp, it's outside.
I was going to say, if they're willing to look at a golden calf that they made and say, this is the God that let us out of Egypt. I mean, this is a picture of the actual God that let them out of Egypt. And I would hope that would be going through their mind of, oh, it's not a golden calf, it's much better.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real, it's more powerful.
It's the true and the living God. And remember, that's what the word Lord meant, Yahweh meant, is I am who I am. He is the all-existing one, the everlasting one. Okay? Okay. All right. So here's Moses. He's there, at the tent. Now, when we can skip on down to verse number 12, we see that, going back to this idea about, hear the Lord and what they're doing going forward, is that Moses is going to have some concerns that's going to take place. And so if we look at verse number 12, we see Moses starts to have some questions. And he says to the Lord, you have been telling me to lead this people, but you have not let me know who you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name and have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach your ways that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. And so Moses, in this kind of separation between God and the Israelites, Moses is the middleman, so to speak, because yes, God is separated from the people, so on and so forth. But Moses is the one that is going to be leading them, right? And so what he's saying here is, you're telling me to lead these people, but, am I really in your favor? You're telling me that you know my name, but how close am I to you in all of this? Because I think Moses is kind of need a little bit of reassurance here, right? Because if God is going to be further removed from the people and Moses is still going to be asked to lead the people, then doesn't that put a little bit more burden on Moses? Because, he's going to be saying, hey, I'm leading you in the way of the Lord. I'm taking you the direction God wants you to. Here's God's laws. Here's his commandments that you need to be following. And he's going to be instructing them. He's going to be teaching them, so on and so forth. But if God doesn't have this physical presence, so to speak, then it's kind of like, okay, Moses, he's got all the more responsibility that's there. And so he's thinking, okay, Can I have a little bit of reassurance from all this? And I think the reassurance that he says is in verse 13, if you're pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. I think that there is a lesson for us to learn there, and that is that if we want to be close to the Lord, if we want his presence in our lives, don't we need to be doing the same thing of what Moses is saying here? And that is, teach me your ways so I may know you. And then I can continue to find favor with you. I mean, what was true for Moses back then is really true for us now. You know, we need to be learning more about God. We need to be learning more about his ways. You know, the purpose of studying the Bible shouldn't be so that we can, you know, pack our minds full of facts and figures so that, you know, we can have all this information. You know, at the end of the day, the reason why we should learn the Bible is so that we can learn more about God. And the reason why we need to learn more about God is so that we can learn what to do with God, and in turn, we can be more pleasing to him. Okay? So, you know, worked for Moses, works for us too. Okay, so this is what the Lord's reply is in verse 14. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And so Moses is saying, you know, how can I be sure that who's going to go with me with all of this? And the Lord is saying, my presence is going to go with you. And so Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. And so, you know, Moses is kind of thinking, okay, you know, if you're saying that the angel is going to go, but you aren't, then if your presence is going to be with me, it also needs to be with the people. If your presence isn't going to be with us, then don't send us, because we need you to do everything that we need to do. And I think that there's another lesson right there to be learned too, and that is that in order for us to have any kind of success in our Christian lives, we've got to have Jesus' presence with us, right? You know, if we're going to have any kind of effect in God's kingdom, if we're going to have any kind of effect over temptation, if we're going to have any kind of success in God's plans and purposes for our lives, then we've got to have God with us. In the same way as what Jesus was talking about in John chapter 15, is that you have to remain in me to bear fruit. If you do not remain in me, you won't bear fruit. Same thing with here, Moses. He's saying, you know, your presence needs to be with us. And if your presence is not with us, then don't send us away, because it's really not going to work. Verse number 16, he says, how will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? So again, you know, God, if you're not with us, but you're with me, how are people going to know that you're with me? Okay. So we continue on down, and Moses says the Lord says to Moses in verse 17, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and know you by name. And so this is what Moses says, verse 18, show me your glory. And so in verse number 19, the Lord said, I will cause my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. What do you think that means? Nobody can see God and live.
He's just so, what's the word? he's just, I don't know, unbelievable, or, you know,
okay.
Bright.
Okay.
Magnificent.
Okay.
What's
Great.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
great, so awesome.
Spectacular.
It's just unimaginable. We can't imagine.
Uh-huh.
And would be shocked, or maybe shocked.
Beyond shocked?
Pardon? Beyond shocked. And just like overwhelmed that we would. Good question.
Okay. What about this? I mean, God is just everything that you described. right? But God is also holy, okay? So of all the traits that you described, that everything that God is that would show how great and awesome he is, it's because all of these traits that would leave us with that impression are infinite, okay? But what about God's holiness?
He is holy.
He is holy. And what are we?
Sinners.
We're unholy. And so how can an unholy people come into the presence of a holy God? Well, we can, except for the grace and mercy that he gives to us, right? Okay. The grace and mercy that he's going to give to us means that one day we're going to be resurrected, we're going to be raptured, we're going to be given a new body, and we are therefore going to be able to stand in his presence because we're going to be made holy. But right here now, we can't do it, right? Okay. Not as far as to see the extent of his glory. And so that's what I think God is telling Moses, is that you're not going to be able to see my face, see me right up close, because of that holiness that's there. Nobody can see me and live. All right. And as far as, like, for example, we've got a lot of human traits that are being ascribed to God here, like his hand, his face, his back. Does God really have any of those things? Well, he's spirit, right? And so because he's spirit, then we who are living in this physical realm, it's like, that complicates things now, doesn't it? And so this is what he says. What he says in verse number 21, it says, there's a place near me where you may stand on rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock. And so here's a rock with a crevice in it. And the Lord is going to put Moses in this crevice that's there. And he says, I'm going to cover you with my hand until after I pass by. And so it's almost like, the Lord is taking Moses, putting him there, and as he passes by, he's, and then when he is past Moses, what he's going to do is he's going to remove his hand. And in verse number 23, it says, then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Okay? Now, thinking back to John, it's kind of interesting that, we've got some similarities between here and John. Do you remember in chapter 14, it was Thomas that said, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us? Okay? Do you think that this is what Thomas was thinking of right here? If we can just see the Lord in his glory right here, then this is going to be enough for us. But was it really what Thomas needed at that given day? Well, no, because Jesus said, how long have I been with you? If you have seen, it wasn't Thomas, it was Philip. How long have I been with you? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. And so as far as the glory and the grace of God, here we have Jesus Christ, God the Son, who has come and been made flesh, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the one and only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And so everything that we need to see and know about God, we can see and know through the person of Jesus Christ. We don't need to see God as Moses is seeing God right here in order to have him with us in our life. Okay? Moses is doing this because he's in this quandary right here, and that is, I got to lead the people, but how are they going to know? How are they going to believe me? What's going to be going on? And so here's the solution for it. Okay? Now, chapter 34. What we see is that this is going to be the next day. Now, the next day, the Lord is going to be starting out giving him some instructions. It says, the Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first one, and I will write on them the words that were that were on the first tablet, which you broke. Be ready in the morning, then come up on Mount Sinai, present yourself to me there on the top of the mountain. No one is to come up with you or is to be seen anywhere on the mountain. Not even the flocks and herds may graze in front of the mountain. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first one and went up to Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. And so you recall 40, I guess this is 42 days before this, Moses had those 2 stone tablets and the Lord spoke the 10 commandments, but then he engraved what he said with his finger in those 2 stone tablets, right? Now, going back to, the common view of Moses, what does the 2 stone tablets look like? They look like gravestones, don't they? You got this big stone here, you've got this big stone here, and Moses is carrying these 2 stones like they're, styrofoam, okay? That is more than likely not what they were. They were probably stone tablets, small, okay? Because archaeological evidence, when they have tablets that have writing, governmental writing, contract writing, covenant writing, which is what this would be, they would have been in 2 manageable tablets, not 2 enormously huge tablets that it would have taken, Samson to carry up on top of the mountain. So, kind of get that idea out of your mind. Get your idea on the mind that, here is Moses carrying these 2 stone tablets that he's chiseled out. He's going up on top of the mountain. And he is going to now start to have more of a conversation with the Lord. What we see is that in verse number 5, it says, Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord, as he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of their father to the 3rd and 4th generation. Now, that's quite a lot of proclamation, isn't it? But when you look at all of these words that the Lord is proclaiming to Moses, he's really describing a lot to him. And that is, first of all, he is the Lord, meaning, he is Yahweh, he's Jehovah. He is the I am. He is the true and the living God. But look at these characteristics that he has here, and that is, he's compassionate. He's gracious. He is slow to anger. He's abounding in love and faithfulness. He maintains love to thousands and forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Now, don't you think that those are some things that Moses is really needing to hear at this point, right? I mean, Moses is looking at all of these things that the Israelites have done, and it grieves him. It's probably just eating him up that the Israelites have done this to the Lord. I mean, he was so angry when he came down off the mountain. He broke those original tablets and burned the golden calf, and quite a show, right? And so I think he's kind of needing to hear a little bit about who God really is, and that is that God is gracious, he's compassionate, he's slow to anger, he is forgiving thousands, he is forgiving sin, he's forgiving wickedness, he's forgiving rebellion. And so, as far as God's approach to the Israelites, Moses is needing to hear all of these things about who God is and what God is going to do. Now, what's more is that he says, yet he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. And so, there is this sense of righteousness and holiness within God. I think that many times today we have this view of God that, God is just this continual pushover. God is just this continual one that, everything's good with him. Everything's great with him. He doesn't care about sin. He doesn't care about righteousness. But you stop and think about God like that, and it really doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, is there a problem just within our society today if authority figures do not care about what goes on? I mean, it doesn't matter where it is. I mean, like for example, at school, is it a problem when the principals and the administrative staff, they don't care what the kids do? Kids can do whatever they want. Kids can run amok. Kids can go all over the place. Kids can, cuss out teachers. Kids can run down the halls. Kids can, destroy things. If the principals are just like, oh man, those are just kids, man, those rowdy teenagers, what are you going to do? Okay. Is that the kind of school that you would want to be in, or is that the kind of school that you would want your children in? Hopefully not, because there's a lot of problems in that, right? So when you think about people who are in charge of things, you've got to have you have the idea that rules matter, righteousness matters, enforcement of things matter. Now, if that's true in just a small thing about a school, then just think about the grandeur of the universe. I mean, if you had the ultimate authority of the universe who's saying, I don't care about what happens, anything goes, and it's okay with me, then would that really be a very good universe, or would that be a chaotic universe? It'd be mass chaos, wouldn't it? And so here you've got two different sides of God. You've got one side that is going to be one of love, but you also got another side to him that's going to be one of righteousness. And when you look at God, neither one is going to be bigger than the other one. Yes, God is gracious. Yes, God is merciful. Yes, God is slow to anger. Yes, God forgives. But at the same time, yes, God does have standards, and yes, God does punish the wicked, right? Okay. So if we're wicked, then what do we do? We appeal to the other side. We appeal to forgiveness, right? Okay. So do you have an understanding about what's going on here? Moses is seeing God's glory. God is passing him by, covering his hand. And I think as he's passing by, he's saying who he is as far as what his characteristics are. And then after he passes by and Moses sees all this, what we see in verse number 8 is Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. "O Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes," he said, "then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our wickedness and our sin, and take us as your inheritance." Then the Lord said, "I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people, I will do wonders like never done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I command you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land where you are going, or they will be a snare to you." Okay, so Lord saying, we're going to go there. I'm going to be with you. I'm renewing this covenant that is there with people. Now, what do you think when the Lord said in verse number 10, "I'm making a covenant with you"? Who do you think he's talking about? Do you think that he's talking about Moses himself? Or do you think that he's talking about all of the Israelite people? In other words, is that you a you singular you, or is that a you all you? Y'all.
It has to be y'all.
Okay, why do you say that?
Because Moses is only one man and he can lead them and guide them. But the people themselves have to accept it also.
Okay.
Accept God.
Okay.
So God's saying, okay, I will be here for all of you.
Okay.
But Moses is a spokesperson, so he's telling Moses, I'm making the covenant with you, but you've got to, as their leader.
Okay. I think you're right. I think you're onto something there. And that is that God made that covenant with the Israelite nation. Okay. Now, the Israelites broke that covenant. And so it's kind of like, okay, what are we going to do with this relationship going forward, right? Are we going to just simply say, okay, Israelites, I'm not going to destroy you, but, you guys just go on your merry way. Well, what about God's plans that he promised Isaac and Jacob? Okay, well, we're going to take them, we're going to get them in there, we're going to do that. But what about the covenant? Or is, the covenant still broken? Is it intact? What's going on? Is it just Moses now? There's what I'm saying is that there's probably a lot of people back with the Israelites that are saying, where do we go forward from here? God is obviously displeased with us, and he's saying that there's going to be a separation there. We see the separation with Moses and the tent of the meeting and so on and so forth. But what does that mean for us as a people, as a nation, going forward? And so, because of God being compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, so on and so forth, he's telling Moses, I am going to make a covenant with you. In other words, that covenant that was once is going to be reestablished. It's going to be repaired. Okay? And so he's saying the people that you live among, they were going to see great and mighty things that is beyond anything that he's going to do with any other nation. And you're going to go into Canaan. You're going to drive out, God's going to drive out all the people there, and they are going to have Canaan to be their inheritance. But at the same time, there's got to be this understanding that's there. If we skip on down to verse 14, it says, do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is a jealous God. And so, the Lord does not want them worshiping any of these other gods. I think that, we're not going to be able to quite understand things the way they did because, we grow up in a monotheistic society. So we're not looking at God, the true and the living God, and this 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 God. But one thing that I think that we can see is that God really wants loyalty, doesn't he? I think that that's one thing that we as Christians, we need to do and think about is we need to be loyal to God. We need to be dedicated to God. We need to put him first in our lives because that's exactly what he wants. Okay? All right. The rest, I won't say the rest of chapter 34, but what we see in a lot of chapter 34 is some more of the rules and the regulations that are there. Now, how long is Moses going to be up on this mountain? 40 days. 40 days. If we skip on down, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, write down these words in accordance with these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. Moses was with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water. So what was Moses doing on the mountain that whole time? He's writing things down because it says, write these words down. But when you look at the words from verse number 12 down through verse number 26, if you were to sit down and write those, how long do you think it's going to take you? 40 days? That's like 2 or 3 words a day. I mean, there's not a whole lot of words in there, right? And so there's probably some other things that Moses received up there on the mountain that is later on described in the book of Exodus. But Moses is there for those 40 days, and he is there communicating with the Lord. And you notice that the Lord writes on the tablets the words of the covenant, which is the Ten Commandments. And so God takes and writes on the tablets and replenishes what Moses had already broke. Okay? So now the 40 days are over, and Moses is going down the mountainside. And in verse number 29, it says, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near to him. But Moses called to them, so Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commands the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face, but whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, and there is the tent of meeting, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out, he told the Israelites what he had been commanded. They saw that his face was radiant. Then Moses would put the veil back over his face until he went to speak with the Lord. Now, did you ever realize that Moses did that? And so if we were to go up to Moses, really, I think that pretty much at any time forward in his life, he would have a veil over his face. And the reason why he had a veil over his face is because if he lifted up the veil, he would be glowing. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Now, what was Moses wanting God to do for him? To show him his glory. But why do you think Moses wanted it? To give him peace a little bit, but also to give the Israelites the understanding of, yeah, this guy is speaking for the Lord. This guy is there. And I don't think that this is what, Moses didn't really think about this, but this is the what God chose, is that when he came down, people would, beyond a shadow of a doubt, look at Moses and go, oh, wow, you've been in God's presence. Because after all, there's the glowing up on top of the mountain, and now that he has come down, Moses has that special presence with the Lord. Okay? And so that's why I say that, we hear about Moses being tucked away in the cleft of the rock and seeing God, but I don't think that we quite understand all the implications of that as far as how the Israelites would have seen it. And how the Israelites would have seen it is, this is something that even though we sinned, even though we don't have the same thing with God, God is still gracious and merciful to us, and we still have this visible person that has the presence of God with him. And so we can trust him. Okay? Okay, you got any questions or comments about any of that? No? Okay.
I was going to say, like the people could see the radiance on Moses' face, so they know he was with God, as God's word. And then, of course, these days, I guess it's important that people can see God in us, through us, in our actions. We may not be glowing, but it's important that we study God's word and have God in our heart, so that we need to represent him.
Well, we are not physically glowing, but you remember what Jesus said to his disciples? You are the light of the world. Right? Now, they're not light emitters, they're light reflectors. But as people look at them, they see their good works, and they glorify God who is in heaven, because God is the one that is behind all those good works. Right? And so in our lives, no, we may not be glowing like Moses, but we should have a glow about us. We should be able to be the light of this world. People should look at us and say, you know what, even if I don't agree with these people, even if I don't like these people believe what they say. These people are true and genuine to what they believe. These people are followers of Christ, even if they don't believe in Jesus Christ. You know, that I think should be what our real objective is to say, hey, you know what, I'm allowing God to work through me, and if people can see my good works, then they'll glorify our God who is in heaven. So, by the way, you probably, maybe you remember me talking about, I think I've mentioned it like in Bible translation, that if you look at medieval paintings of Moses, he's got horns, okay? And the reason why medieval people painted Moses with horns is because of this passage right here. They translated, they didn't understand the Hebrew word that is translated as radiant. It really is talking about strength. And so they, a horn is a strength. And so they thought, oh, well, it's Moses' horns. And so they painted Moses with horns on his head. And then later on, it's like, linguistic research, it's kind of like, okay, here's this horn, which is metaphoric of strength. And this strength is really talking about this radiance that's there, and that's why he has the veil. So that's interesting to me. So, all right, well, we'll call it quits right there. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the tabernacle and the construction of the tabernacle and what all of those things mean. And so, if you have never really put any kind of study into the tabernacle before and what it is, what was used for, what it symbolizes, then, that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Okay? Okay. Well, let's bow our heads. Dear Lord in heaven, we thank you for your many blessings. We thank you for your word and your guidance. We thank you for being with us, and we ask that you please allow your presence to be with us. Help us to be dedicated to you. Help us to learn your ways, and help us to be light that is reflected to others. And Lord, may you receive the glory and the praise from all the things that are going on in our lives. Lord, please forgive us of our sins, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.